Okay, let's dive in. Sometimes the biggest impacts come from, well, unexpected places.
Right.
Imagine this young guy, 17 maybe, working in a shoe shop in Boston. Not exactly seminary material, just a regular kid fitting shoes.
Mm-hmm.
But this commoner, like hardly any formal education, ends up speaking to millions, millions, influencing whole countries, starting huge institutions still around today. How does that happen?
It's an amazing question, isn't
Yeah.
it? And that's exactly what we're getting into. We've got this whole pile of sources here, articles, research notes, all about that shoe store worker, Dwight L. Moody.
And his partner, Ira D. Sankey. Can't forget Sankey.
Absolutely. The singer, a crucial partnership.
So our mission here for you is to pull out the key takeaways from all this material. We want to get beyond just what they did and really understand the how.
Yeah, how did they handle the massive changes in the 19th century? What were the sort of surprising bits about how they operated?
And why does it still matter? Why are we still talking about them? This deep dive is really tailored for you, a shortcut to getting informed on this really fascinating story.
Okay, so to get it, you really need the context. The 19th century, America, Britain, it was a time of just immense change. The Industrial Revolution was really kicking into high gear.
Right, people moving off farms, heading into cities that were just exploding in size.
Exactly, and those cities, well, the sources paint a pretty grim picture sometimes.
Yeah, I saw that. Rapid growth causing huge social problems, traditional support systems breaking down, lots of immigrants arriving, often alone, and just grinding poverty.
And the work conditions.
Terrible, like 14-hour days, 6, maybe 7 days a week, for basically nothing.
Right, and this huge gap opens up, between the factory owners, the wealthy, and then the masses crammed into these awful tenements. Often no running water, unsanitary.
That's the world Moody and Sankey stepped into.
And right into that steps Dwight L. Moody.
Yeah.
Born in 1837, Northfield, Massachusetts. And the key thing that jumps out, he's a layman.
Not the typical educated preacher type.
No seminary degree, no formal theology training. They called him the commoner of Northfield. Kind of affectionately, it seems. Left home at 16.
And by 17, like you said, working in his uncle's shoe store in Boston.
Yeah.
Found it interesting, though. The sources mention his uncle had some pretty strict rules for him taking the job.
Oh, yeah.
Had to avoid questionable amusements live, where the uncle said, and this is key, go to church and Sunday school.
And that's where Edward Kimball comes in, his Sunday school teacher.
Exactly. The sources describe Kimball actually going to the shoe store to talk with Moody.
And Moody called that conversation his new birth. He really described it vividly, didn't he?
He did. Said things like, I was in a new world, the birds sang sweeter, that kind of thing. Said he was born twice.
So he's 7, and then spiritually in 55.
Yeah.
And the Bible, which he found dry before.
Dry as last year's almanac was his phrase.
Suddenly became this, living book to him. Light of heaven shining through it.
But here's the surprising part. Reading the sources. What happens next? He applies for church membership. And the committee basically says, we doubt this kid's going to amount to much as a Christian, certainly not in public ministry.
Get out her. Really?
Yeah. Even Kimball, his own teacher, apparently said Moody's mind was spiritually darker than almost anyone he'd met.
Wow. That's something. For the guy who becomes D.L. Moody.
Right.
Yeah.
Just shows you potential isn't always obvious at the start.
Definitely not. A real lesson there.
Yeah.
But once that spark hit Moody, his drive was just immense. He moves to Chicago in 56.
Planning to make money initially, right?
Yeah, make his fortune.
Yeah.
But ministry just took over. He starts renting pews in churches just so he could fill them with people he'd find wandering the streets.
Going into saloons, hotels, handing out tracts.
And then the Sunday school thing, that was huge.
Such a great story in the sources. He's told, sure, teach any kids you bring. So next Sunday.
He shows up with 18 ragged kids, added to the 16 already there.
And when winter came, they needed a space. Where does he find? An old saloon.
An abandoned saloon, and he'd clean it himself every Sunday. Sweep, air it out.
That really shows his practical side, doesn't it? Just going where the need was.
Totally. And that school just exploded.
Yeah.
Sources say 650 kids by the end of year 1.
1,000 the next year, eventually 1,500 kids.
It got so big, President-elect Lincoln actually visited in 1860.
Wow. That tells you something about its impact right there in Chicago.
Definitely. And he got really involved with the YMCA, too.
Lived on a bench there for a bit, didn't he, after quitting the shoe business to do ministry full-time?
Yeah. And we have to remember the YMCA, back then was explicitly Christian.
Right.
Sources say he revived their kind of dull noon prayer meetings
Yeah.
by praying like crazy beforehand and just grabbing anyone walking past.
Added hymns, testimonies, and apparently wasn't afraid to cut people off if they went on too long.
Huh. Yeah, that seems like a Moody trait. He kept that directness.
His Civil War work is interesting, too. One source calls him a Quaker pacifist in leaning, but he still felt he had to minister the soldiers, went to the camps, held meetings, gave out materials.
Shows that commitment again, being present where people are hurting.
And it was through the YMCA work that he met Ira Sankey.
That's right, Indianapolis, 1870, a YMCA convention.
Moody hears Sankey sing, is just immediately struck and basically says, "You need to come sing with me."
Their first gig together was totally impromptu, outside the convention hall, right there on the spot.
Amazing. And Sankey's background is important, too.
Yeah, born in Pennsylvania, 1840. Loved singing from when he was young. Apparently walked miles to church just for the music.
Like Moody, an early spiritual influence, an old farmer, took him to Sunday school. And he had his own conversion experience around 16.
But joining Moody, that wasn't easy for Sankey.
No, the sources make that clear. He had a stable government job, good pay, music roles at church, a family.
A lot to give up. He really wrestled with it. You know, what if people got sick of his singing? What if something happened to Moody? The uncertainty.
He prayed about it. And one source puts it kind of humorously.
Oh, yeah. Says Sankey prayed one way, Moody prayed another, and it took Moody 6 months to pray him out of business. Love that. But Sankey took that leap of faith. Gave up the security for the work.
It really underscores the conviction they both had right from the start of their partnership.
Absolutely. And what a team they became. Moody's, like, direct, punchy preaching.
Yeah, really plain spoken.
And Sankey's singing, which is just deeply moving.
They did a quick trip to England in '72, and Moody made such an impression they begged him to come back.
Which he did. The next year, 1873, with Sankey this time. And that kicked off this incredible 2-year campaign. England, Scotland, Ireland.
The sources are unanimous on the impact. Just massive, thousands converted.
They say the country hadn't seen anything like it since, like, Wesley and Whitefield days.
Wow.
And Sankey's singing wasn't just, warm-up music. It was vital.
Right. Sources emphasize he'd pray over his singing, believed it needed prayer just like the preaching.
He used these simple hymns, human hymns, some called them. Not everyone liked them at first.
A bit controversial.
Yeah, some resistance. But when he sang them prayerfully, the sources say they were just incredibly powerful.
There's that story, right, about the resistant crowd. Sankey prays, sings Yet There Is Room, and this prominent theologian, Dr. Horatius Bonar, tells him afterwards, "Well, Mr. Sankey, you sang the gospel tonight."
Exactly. It wasn't just entertainment. It was the message itself, through music.
So when they get back to America in 1875, the invitations just flood in.
Huge campaigns. Brooklyn, Philly, New York, Chicago, Boston, major cities.
And the impact was so obvious, even the New York Times wrote about it.
Yeah, not exactly a religious journal, but they noted this lasting effect on morals, public and private, how the drunken have become sober, the vicious virtuous.
A better principle has entered the sordid life of the day through the labors of these plain men. That's quite a statement from the Times.
It really is. And it wasn't just about the massive crowds. Though, think about that description, Moody addressing an acre of people in London.
Hard to even picture that, an acre of faces.
But they were also deeply committed to one-on-one ministry.
Right, the inquiry room. Sankey especially was gifted there, counseling people after the main meetings.
Sources say he was like a father, gentle guidance. He'd get them to talk about their struggles using Bible language, then help them find relevant voices.
Even P.T. Barnum apparently sought his counsel. And some self-proclaimed skeptic from Missouri.
Shows that personal touch, right? It wasn't just a big show.
And that goes back to Moody's early work, too. The Sunday school in the slums was all about reaching individuals, families, one by one. He saw it as this powerful tool for the whole community. Very personal.
Like early Christian witnessing, really. Individual focus.
So their ministry wasn't rigid, it adapted. Moody's starting that Sunday school in a saloon. That's meeting people right where they are, addressing those urban problems we talked about head on.
Definitely. And their work went beyond just the campaigns, too. Moody founded institutions, major ones.
Back in Northfield, his hometown. Northfield Seminary for girls in '79, Mount Hermon for boys in '81.
And the focus there was interesting high school education, but mixed with manual labor, farming, chores alongside the books, training for Christian service and practical life.
And then, crucially, 1886, the Chicago Evangelization Society.
Which became the Moody Bible Institute, MBI, still huge today.
And its purpose, to train lay people, gap men, he called them.
Bridging the gap, yeah, between ordained clergy and everyday folks, making ministry training accessible, even if you didn't have the formal education.
Which reflects his own path perfectly, doesn't it? The layman leader.
Exactly. Another key piece, I think, to their wide reach was Moody's emphasis on Christian unity.
Yeah, his background was so mixed, denominationally speaking. Unitarian mother, Baptist wife, member of a congregational church, worked closely with Methodists.
He wasn't hung up on labels.
Yeah.
Sources talk about his friendships across different church groups.
Even gave the biggest single donation to build a Catholic church in Northfield. That surprised some people back then, apparently.
It did. But his focus, the sources say, was just uniting Christians to reach people for Christ. Cooperation over doctrine, you know.
An ideal he shared with others, like that Swedish guy Waldenstrom, who influenced him on things like the atonement.
Right. And underpinning all of this, the foundation was prayer, and relying on what Moody specifically called the power of the Holy Spirit.
He described that intense experience in New York, like a rushing wind, his soul becoming an artesian well of power.
And Sankey felt the same about his singing. Total dependence on the Spirit.
That deep conviction, that sense of empowerment, it fueled a ministry that, well, the numbers are staggering. One source estimates 100 million people heard Moody preach.
100 million.
Yeah.
And hundreds of thousands converted just in the English-speaking world.
And in that key decade, 1870, 1880, during their big campaigns, American evangelical churches added something like 3.5 million members. Their work was a massive factor.
It's just an incredible scale of impact for two, like you said, seemingly plain men using their gifts, driven by this intense dedication. And I think that really pulls together the key insights for us, you know. We've traced this journey, a layman, not much schooling, but immense dedication.
Empowered by what he believed was the Holy Spirit.
Becomes this global force. Then the partnership with Sankey, preaching and song, working together powerfully.
We saw Moody's practical innovation, too. The Sunday schools, YMCA work, building schools that last, adapting constantly to the challenges of the day, like those growing, struggling cities.
And that relational focus, valuing the personal touch, prioritizing Christian unity over labels.
So why does it still hit home today? I think it just shows the massive potential of one committed person using whatever gifts they have.
Yeah, it shows how that deep conviction can turn into real practical action, whether it's, you know, cleaning out a saloon for a Sunday school or speaking to thousands.
It's a reminder that sometimes the best methods are pretty simple, really heartfelt, aimed right at meeting people where they actually are.
Makes you think about that quote, the one that hit Moody so hard. From someone in Dublin, wasn't it?
Yeah. The world has yet to see what God can do with and for and through and in a man who is fully and wholly consecrated to him.
And thinking about that 100 million figure, just based on the source material we have, it's staggering if that was the result of one person's focused dedication.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What could happen if others found that same level of, I guess, consecration in whatever sphere they're in today?
Leaves you with a lot to chew on.